Hey everybody, Quentin Hafner here, and I want to take a few minutes this morning and just shoot this quick video on how to build trust in relationships, how to restore trust in relationships, or how to increase the trust in your relationship if you feel like it's not where you're at. So a little bit of a backdrop for this video. I'm currently working with a client who got recently promoted in his job, and so he has a new boss and he can't seem to connect with his boss. He feels like the trust between him and his boss isn't where it needs to be. And so he and I were having a conversation on how to kind of increase that, how to improve that, and what kind of things he could do to ultimately make that better. Okay, so this video is a recap of he and I's conversation. So I want to share with you 5 things you can do that can exponentially increase trust in any relationship. Okay, so number 1, in order to have a lot of trust in relationships, we have to keep our word. Okay, or another way to say that is that we have to be consistent. So if I say that I'm going to be somewhere at a certain time, I have to show up at that time. Because if I don't, then all of a sudden there's like little cracks in our container of trust start to break. So it's really important that we become people who are reliable from in the sense that we ultimately commit to doing what we say that we're going to do. So we want to really keep our word. We want to really be consistent with that. We don't want to be kind of wishy-washy or flaky, or we don't want to be the kind of people who feel unreliable to others. Like sometimes I can trust you and sometimes I can't trust you, because ultimately that leads to a sense of distrust. Okay, so we want to be really consistent, and we really want to work on keeping our word and being the kind of people that follow through and do the things that we say that we're going to do. Okay, number 2, in order to build trust, we have to communicate. Okay, and the way I like to say it is that we have to talk early and we have to talk often. So communicate. We have to talk through stuff. We have to share with people what's on our mind, because what happens, it's just human nature that if we're not talking, if we're not over communicating our experience with somebody that we're trying to build trust with, doubt starts to creep in our mind, and we start to create stories in our head that ultimately may not be true. And so we start to think things about somebody else, and we start to wonder about them, and usually all that stuff's filtered through a negative lens that creates a sense of distrust in a relationship. So if you're in a relationship and trust isn't where you want it to be, it's really important that you just commit to talking through stuff as much as you can, because the more you can do that, the more trust is going to increase in your relationship. Okay, number 3, one of the best ways to build trust is learning how to be vulnerable in relationships. Okay, so what that means is it kind of goes beyond communication, but we're gonna take the communication to a whole new level, and we're gonna learn how to share really what's kind of on our hearts. Like what's really going on for us, and we might share our emotions or our experiences. And we might talk about things that are difficult for us or things that we're challenged with. And we're communicating all this in a very non-judgmental and non-critical way. And I think it's a really great, if you think about this in your own life, you'll see that people who've been vulnerable with you throughout your life, they're almost very easy to trust, because you kind of have this sense of this person like, gosh, if this person's willing to open up with me and to kind of expose themselves, it makes us feel really safe in the relationship. It makes us feel like, like I can really rely on that person, that if this person's willing to take those kind of risks, then they're probably somebody that I could also take those kind of risks with, and we can we'll be able to trust each other. So to the extent that we have an ability to be vulnerable in relationships will be a really big predictor in how well trust gets developed or fostered in your important relationships. Okay, number 4 is learning how to be honest. Okay, just like being vulnerable, it's very important that we learn how to be honest, because honesty is like a bedrock foundational piece of trust. And when we're not honest in relationships, it's very difficult to build trust, because It's like if we're not saying what's really on our minds, if we're not saying what's really important to us or what really matters to us, or things that may not be working well for us, then we're always going to be a little bit in the dark, and we're always going to be a little bit suspicious. We're always going to be a little bit left wondering, like, oh gosh, I wonder what's going on for that person. So being honest, it seems really counterintuitive, and I tell this to my clients all the time. Saying the hard things and having hard conversations with people, sometimes people think, well, I don't want to say that hard thing, because if I say that hard thing and if I'm really honest, it's going to erode the trust in our relationship. Like somehow it's going to break the trust if I say this thing that I know the other person's not going to want to hear. And in fact, the opposite is true. It seems really counterintuitive, but if we say the hard thing, if we say the thing that we know the other person may not want to hear, or the other person's going to have a hard time hearing, it actually fosters trust, because that person internalizes this experience of like, oh my gosh, if they're willing to say that to me, if they're willing to tell me that thing that I know is really difficult for them, that's somebody that I can trust. And I might be able in return to be able to say the hard things also. So now you have two people who are both willing to have honest conversations with each other and say the hard thing that ultimately they don't want to do, they don't want to say it, but they're willing to take that risk and say it anyway. And that's how we foster trust. That is such an awesome bedrock foundational piece of developing trust with somebody, is learning how to say the hard things and just learning how to say it in a nice, of course, in a nice and kind way. That's really important too, but learning how to be honest. Okay, and lastly, number 5, how to help build trust in relationships is that we just have to take ownership. Okay, so what happens is, for a lot of people in relationships, the trust isn't where they want it to be, and we kind of do this thing where we say, okay, well, I'm going to let that person work on that. I'm going to kind of defer the trust in our relationship. I'm not going to be accountable and take responsibility for it. I'm going to put that on them. And I just think that the more, the less we can do that, the better off we will all be in relationships. So if the trust in your relationship isn't where you want it to be, just take ownership. You don't have to take ownership of the whole thing, but you can take ownership of your part and say, okay, what could I do? What are the things that I could do today, tomorrow, this week, this month? How can I just kind of go into this mode of like, I am going to do everything in my power to help this person trust me. And so we're gonna adopt that mindset, that extreme ownership mindset, where we're gonna take ownership of it, and we're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna do these things. I'm gonna have honest conversations. I'm gonna be vulnerable. I'm gonna be really consistent. I'm gonna be really open. I'm gonna be somebody that becomes really reliable and somebody that's really dependable. So the more we can do that, we can take ownership of that instead of deferring or acquiescing that to somebody else in the relationship. We ultimately will be better served for that. Okay, so those are the 5 things. I hope that's helpful for you guys. And if you have any questions about anything I'm saying, shoot me a message and I'm happy to talk through it with you. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.